Welcome to The Poetry Lover. This time I will read for you a poem by an American poet called Raymond Carver, and I will read a brief introduction before reading the poem. Raymond Carver was born in 1938 and he passed away in 1988. Raymond Carver was one of the best known American short story writers, but also an excellent poet. Death from cancer interrupted his work at a moment of full development after he had overcome his alcoholism. I couldn't read this poem on Alexander the Great without thinking of his biography, to which, besides, he refers. So I will read this poem on Alexander the Great called Wine. Reading a life of Alexander the Great, Alexander, whose rough father Philip hired Aristotle to tutor the young scion and warrior, to put some polish on his smooth shoulders. Alexander, who later on the campaign trail to Persia carried a copy of the Iliad in a velvet-lined box. He loved that book so much. He loved to fight and drink, too. I came to that place in the life where Alexander, after a long night of carousing, a wine drunk, the worst kind of drunk hangovers you don't forget, threw the first brand to start a fire that burned Persepolis, capital of the Persian Empire, ancient even in Alexander's day. Raised it right to the ground. Later, of course, next morning, maybe even while the fire roared, he was remorseful. But nothing like the remorse felt the next evening, when during a disagreement that turned ugly, and on Alexander's part, overbearing, his face flushed from too many bottles of uncut wine, Alexander rose drunkenly to his feet, grabbed a spear, and drove it through the breast of his friend Cletus, who'd saved his life at Granicus. For 3 days Alexander mourned, wept, refused food, refused to see to his bodily needs. He even promised to give up his wine forever. I've heard such promises and the lamentations that go with them. Needless to say, life for the army came to a full stop, as Alexander gave himself over to his grief. But at the end of those 3 days, the fearsome heat beginning to take its toll on the body of his dead friend, Alexander was pursued to take action. Pulling himself together and leaving his tent, he took out his copy of Homer, untied it, began to turn the pages. Finally, he gave orders that the funeral rites described for Patroclus be followed to the letter. He wanted Cletus to have the biggest possible send-off. And when the pyre was burning and the bowls of wine were passed his way during the ceremony, of course, what do you think? Alexander drank his fill and passed out. He had to be carried to his tent. He had to be lifted to put into his bed. What a beautiful poem by Raymond Carver, American poet. And if you enjoyed this poem as much as I did, please hit like and subscribe to The Poetry Lover if you haven't yet. And I'll see you next time.